Welcome back to Face the Nation. The World Health Organization reported a record 350,000 new coronavirus cases on Friday. The Americas, Europe, and Southeast Asia are all seeing their highest numbers of cases yet since the pandemic began early this year. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Liz Palmer reports from London.
Good morning. After a summer where infection rates across Europe were really pretty low, a lot of us hoped that the virus was under control. Well, we couldn't have been more wrong. This week, Europe had a third of all new cases worldwide, and control measures are ramping up again. In Madrid, there's a state of emergency. Thousands of extra police are on duty controlling movement in and out of hotspot neighborhoods. France and French hospitals are worst hit, with over 26,000 new cases yesterday, more even than last spring. Berliners are facing a curfew for the first time in 70 years.
Last orders, folks!
And across England, pubs have to send drinkers home at 10 o'clock. In Scotland, most have to close altogether. In London, musicians staged a protest last week against the ban on concerts they say is killing their livelihoods. India, believe it or not, has had fewer new cases than Europe for the past few days. But because of overcrowding and poverty, it does have the highest daily death rate on Earth, just ahead of the U.S. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un staged a military extravaganza on Saturday to convince the world that his missiles are bigger than anyone else's and his COVID problem smaller. North Korea has not had a single COVID case, he said, and offered condolences to the rest of the world. And finally, in a country that really has pretty much stamped out COVID, New Zealand allowed its first international rugby match since the pandemic to go ahead in front of a crowd of 30,000 fans, none of them wearing masks. Here in Britain, the government's current strategy is a version of whack-a-mole, very strict local measures in hot spots in order to try and avoid another blanket lockdown, which would even further damage the economy. Margaret?
That's Liz Palmer in London. Thank you. Soon after the president was diagnosed with COVID-19, he was given Regeneron's antibody cocktail. That's an experimental treatment that has been received by only 10 other people outside of ongoing clinical trials. We want to go now to the CEO of Regeneron, Dr. Leonard Schleifer, who joins us from Westchester, New York this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Margaret.
So President Trump was given this cocktail, and he has since said that it was both a cure and that he is now immune. Does your drug cure COVID, and does it make you immune?
Right. So the president's case is a case of one, and that's what we call a case report. And it is evidence of what's happening, but it's kind of the weakest evidence that you can get, although there are some very interesting aspects of his case, such as he was elderly, he had some risk factors, and that he did not have his own immune system in gear when he was sick and he got treated with our immune system in a vial, if you will. But the real evidence has to come about how good a drug is and what it'll do on average has to come from these larger clinical trials, these randomized clinical trials, which are the gold standard. And those are ongoing. We've got some preliminary evidence that we've talked with the FDA and we're going for an emergency use authorization because we think it's appropriate at this time. But yes, the president's case is a case report, perhaps the most analyzed case report ever, but it's just low down on the evidence scale that we really need.
But your drug, does it create immunity?
Yes, it does. When the virus comes in your system, your immune system is trying to create immunity. It's trying to create these things called antibodies, which are going to glom onto this virus and provide you immunity from getting sick with the disease.
For how long?
A vaccine, well, it depends on how you acquire this immunity. If you get it in the form of vaccine, it's hoped that it might last for years. In some cases, vaccines can last for decades. If you get it in the form of natural immunity, that isn't known yet. Right. Could be months, could be years. If you get it in our vial, if you will, that's probably going to last you for months.
A few months. Okay. The president has also said he wants to make your drug free to anyone who needs it. Have you talked to the president about this idea, and how would it work?
Yeah, well, we've talked to the administration a lot about this, and what they decided to do is take some risk. Back in the spring, before we actually had any data from randomized trials, they went ahead and said, listen, you start manufacturing the product, we will commit to buy it from you, stop manufacturing the other products that you're working on or move them elsewhere, and let us make sure that if it does work, it'll be available. And what the
that was a
government
$450 million contract that the U.S. taxpayer paid for. So,
correct.
But how much
they will
supply? How much supply did taxpayers just buy? Because the president says he's making it free to everyone.
Right. Well, they bought from us several 100,000, maybe around 300,000 doses, which they're going to make it for free. But I think that the administration has been working recently. I saw an announcement with AstraZeneca. Look, we need, Regeneron can't do this alone. We need the entire industry, and I'm so proud. The industry has risen. We have companies like Lilly, great companies. We're partners with Roche, one of the best companies in this whole field. Amgen's involved, AstraZeneca's involved, Glaxo's involved. We all have to step up if we're going to provide enough of this.
Well, and exactly that point, providing enough is a key question. There were nearly 60,000 people infected in this country on Friday alone, just on Friday. Regeneron, in that FDA emergency use authorization application that you said you made this past week, said there are doses ready for 50,000 patients.
Right.
That's not even enough.
Not enough.
It's not even enough for one day of infection. So who decides who's going to get this supply of your drug?
Right. So I think this is going to be worked out by the government, in consultation with the FDA, in consultation with ethical experts, coming up with a distribution system where we take what's limited and we try and give it to the people who most need it, who would most benefit from it, the vulnerable people, elderly people, people who are high at risk, household contacts perhaps. We have to figure out ways to ration this. And we have to get
And the government would do that, from your understanding? Decide who gets the drug and who doesn't?
I think in consultation with local health authorities, that's what they've been doing with remdesivir, Gilead's drug.
Yeah. Right.
It's a complicated problem.
It is, and there were shortages of that, which is why I ask you. I want to ask you something specific to how your drug was developed. According to your company, the antibodies in it were developed using cells that were derived from fetal tissue, a cell line known as 293T. Those were harvested from the kidney tissue of an aborted fetus. There are also vaccine makers using this cell line. But the Trump administration last year has suspended federal funding for research projects that involve fetal tissue from abortions. Should the president and the administration reconsider it, given that this breakthrough was possible using those kind of cells?
Yeah, well, let me be very clear. Our drug is not manufactured using fetal cells. That's not in the way we make the product.
Developed, but not.
Let's not, we shouldn't exaggerate the situation.
I'm not. I'm reading what your company said, which was it was developed using it.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting you. I'm just saying we as a society. And it's not used to manufacture the product. It's a standard cell line that was derived over 50 years ago. And so it's used as a research tool. Where that research should be done, that's a good debate to have, but it's probably not the debate we need to have right now.
Okay. Who should be getting this drug in terms of how you think it should be used? Is it a prophylactic? Should it be given to diabetics, asthmatics, pregnant people?
Right. Those are great questions, Margaret. It can be used, we think, as a prophylactic. We're doing a trial to see whether or not, if you live in the household of somebody who's got it, whether it would stop you from getting it. And that would be very important evidence that we hope to get in the not too distant future. Then we might think about if somebody in a nursing home gets it, we can treat the other people in the nursing home. If people who are very sick are exposed to people who don't have good immune systems. Yeah. These are all really important questions, which we're trying to our best, how we're building this plane and flying it at the same time to be ready to answer some of those questions as well.
Understood. Thank you, Doctor, for your time. And we will be back with Dr. Scott Gottlieb, so stay with us. And we're back with former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb, who is in Westport, Connecticut. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
The president said yesterday the virus is disappearing. The numbers tell a different story. Friday, we saw the largest one-day increase in new cases in 2 months. How prepared are we as a country for what's about to happen?
I think we're going to face a difficult fall and winter. What we thought might be just a bump after Labor Day clearly is a resurgence in the virus heading into the fall and the winter. You're seeing cases build across the entire country. There's now about 15 states with a positivity rate above 10%. About 40 states have a RT, a rate of transfer above 1.0, which means they have an expanding epidemic. And most concerning is hospitalizations are building. People look at the number of cases and they tend to discount that. They say that because we're testing more, we're turning over more cases. But the hospitalizations are the clearest objective measure of rising infection around the country. And also remember, we test more not just because we test more because we have more virus. Some people get tested because they're worried well, but most people get tested because they're either having symptoms or they're in touch with someone who is known to have COVID. So testing is going up because more infections spreading around the country. So we're in a difficult situation heading into the fall. I think the only caveat is, in terms of us being better prepared for this wave, is that we have dramatically improved clinical care in hospitals. So I think we're going to have better outcomes overall, but we're still going to have a lot of death and disease between now and the end of the year.
Well, I ask you that because you've been on this program warning since August that the Midwest is trending in the wrong direction, trending upwards. This past week, the Wisconsin governor started setting up a field hospital because the ICU units in hospitals are getting overwhelmed. Why aren't those states better prepared?
Well, in many respects, the states are better prepared in terms of the capacity in their healthcare system. I think the reality is that the preparation includes building field hospitals. You have to build surge capacity. The hospitals themselves just physically don't have the infrastructure to deal with the magnitude of the infection once this becomes epidemic within a local region. So this is part of the preparation. I think when you look at the hospitals and talk to hospital executives, and I've been talking to them, they feel a lot more confident about their preparations in terms of stockpiling ventilators, stockpiling protective equipment. But when this does roll through a region and becomes densely epidemic, it's going to look like this. They're going to have to build surge capacity, swing capacity. They're going to have to suspend elective surgeries. That's the system being prepared. That's the reality of this virus. And the other thing is, the parts of the Midwest and the northern states around the Great Lakes, which is where the infection is building right now, the parts of the country that are getting colder more quickly, we also see it starting to build in the southern states. And so for those who thought that this had swept through Florida and Texas and Arizona and other states and they had achieved some level of immunity and it wasn't going to come back again, you look at Texas right now and there are concerning signs that they're having a resurgence in infection that is quite dramatic.
And something key to watch as we head towards Election Day. The president himself, you saw this letter released by his physician last night. It didn't explicitly say that the president has tested negative. At this point in his recovery, what are you concerned about? Is he contagious?
Probably not. And he's not going to test negative for a period of time because we know that people continue to shed virus for a long period of time, but that's dead virus. It's virus that doesn't grow in a culture, can't really pass on the infection. There are indications that the president's no longer infectious. They released data on what we call subgenomic RNA, which is an intermediate piece of viral genetic material that you really typically only see when the virus itself is replicating. So that's an indication that he no longer has replication-competent virus, meaning that it's not live virus, but he's going to continue to shed for a while. Now, based on classic criteria, he's about 10 days out from the onset of symptoms. He's been symptom-free as best we know for a number of days now. He's been afebrile without a fever for more than 1 day. That should make him no longer contagious. The only confounding variable here is the drugs he received. The steroids could cause him to shed virus for a longer period of time, but I think on the whole, it's probably a safe assumption that he's no longer contagious. I think the question now is, has his health been restored?
Yeah.
And we know that a lot of patients have lingering effects from COVID.
You heard the Regeneron CEO talk about his drug, and he said he wasn't sure about supply, and Regeneron can't do it alone. You've been saying on this program since July that there needs to be more manufacturing of therapeutics in case we find they work. Well, this one looks like it may work. Why don't we have more supply, given that taxpayers have already invested in this drug?
We would have needed to take different steps in April and May to ramp up manufacturing capacity to have the drug available in larger quantities right now. It's too late for this year. I think we could still take steps to do it for 2021, but we're stuck with the doses we have. This has been a monumental achievement in terms of the time frame in which these companies pivoted to develop these antibody drugs. These drugs always look promising, and they were always believed to be a bridge to a vaccine. We're not going to have it in the quantities we need. I would estimate, just based on current infection rates, if you look at everyone who's above the age of 65, you probably need anywhere between 300 and 400,000 doses a month to supply it just for people who are indicated based on age alone. And there are a lot of other people who'd be indicated for this drug. We're going to have nowhere near those quantities. So we will have to ration this. And that's assuming the infection doesn't continue to expand, which I think it will. So we're not going to have as much drug as we should have. Remember, we could also have used these drugs as a prophylaxis, as Len mentioned, to prevent people from getting the infection. And in fact, the data has shown in the past that they're most effective in that setting. We're not going to have the supply to do that, unfortunately.
So when the president promises to make this available for all, you're saying he had the chance, but the administration missed the window.
Well, we definitely missed the window, and this was raised many times. I wrote about it. Others raised it to the administration, including myself, about trying to commandeer more manufacturing back in April and May, pay companies not to manufacture certain non-essential drugs. Most companies freeze about 12 to 24 months of their bulk stock of their biologics. So some companies could have suspended manufacturing of non-essential biologics and turned over their manufacturing capacity to the production of these drugs and been paid for it. The money was there to do it, but it would have taken a lot of planning. That didn't really occur. Lilly and Regeneron did a lot to free up their own manufacturing, so they're producing a lot of drug, but not enough for the entire population.
Dr. Scott Gottlieb, thank you for your analysis. We'll talk about the economy when we come back, so stay with us. Negotiations between the House, the Senate, and the White House over a new coronavirus relief package continue, but the prospects of getting an agreement, at least before Election Day, continue to look bleak. Neel Kashkari is the head of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis and joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Margaret.
So there's just short about $2 trillion on the line here. This would have included aid to airlines, more jobless benefits, expansion of help to small businesses. Without that, what's the cost to the American economy? What's going to happen?
Well, we're going to continue to see a grinding, very slow recovery with thousands of small businesses around the country going bankrupt. That's why it's so vital that our elected leaders come together to take more action. You know, the job market today, 11 million Americans are still out of work relative to the job market in February. That is as bad as the worst job market during the Great Recession and the Great Financial Crisis. And so a lot of people are suffering, a lot of small businesses are suffering. And just listening to Dr. Gottlieb, it seems like we're at about the halfway point of getting through this pandemic. So more assistance is definitely needed.
But why isn't the urgency that you feel getting through to lawmakers?
Well, obviously, I mean, I'll defer to the political experts on the political negotiations, and obviously we're close to an election. So I imagine that those things are getting involved in the dynamic. But if you look at the data is very clear. The recovery, the strong recovery that we saw in June and July has really flattened out. The virus is climbing now again around the country, especially here in my region, in Minnesota, the Dakotas, Wisconsin. And so you're seeing consumers pull back and not want to go out, not want to take that risk again. And so unfortunately, we still have a long way to go in this pandemic, and that means we need continued assistance.
So this morning from the White House, Larry Kudlow said again that what he's seeing is a V-shaped economic recovery coming right back. You're talking about flashing yellow lights. What is it that you see that worries you?
Well, I'm seeing, especially on the small business front, I mean, some sectors of the economy are doing fine. If you are a white-collar worker like I am, like you are, you're able to work from home, you're really not affected by this pandemic. But there are many sectors of the economy that are still being devastated. The travel and tourism industries, the frontline service industries, restaurants, and that's where you're seeing big job losses and bankruptcies. And this is going to continue to spiral and continue to bleed on. You know, if 11 million Americans can't pay their bills, can't put food on the table, can't make their credit card payments, their car payments. That then has spillover effects to other sectors of the economy. The reason the economy bounced back as strongly as it did in June and July is because Congress was so aggressive in the spring. We need Congress to continue to be aggressive so that the recovery can be stronger.
You know, one number that is really stands out to me is this. 865,000 women have left the workforce since the pandemic began 8 months ago. Compared to that, it's 216,000 men. Women are leading this recession. McKinsey says 2 million women are going to leave the workforce potentially because of childcare issues. This is having a massive social impact. How long does that last?
Well, you're exactly right, Margaret. If you look at the great financial crisis, it took 10 years to rebuild the labor market, to bring back all of those workers who got dislocated, to re-engage them, get them employed again, and get the economy moving again. That's obviously terrible for them and their families, but it also holds back the economy's potential. And that's why more aggressive assistance now to keep people re-engaged, to keep them attached, so that our labor market can recover more quickly. It's of paramount importance, again, for those families directly affected, but actually for the economy as a whole and for all of us.
Well, and any family is affected that has a child, clearly. When you are talking about who is getting hit, it's women. It's also Black and Hispanic workers who have suffered the greatest number of job losses. Is that inequality, some of it pre-existed this pandemic, is that something the Fed can fix?
We cannot fix it alone. I mean, we can do our part by trying to make the labor market and the recovery as strong as we can using our broad-based tools like lowering interest rates and quantitative easing, but we don't have the ability to target the assistance to one group or one region or one sector. Only Congress can do that. And it's much cheaper if you can keep people whole on the front end than if we have these continued layoffs and these continued bankruptcies to try to rebuild it on the back end. That ends up taking a lot longer. That actually ends up being more expensive for the taxpayers.
Well, Senate Republicans continue to argue, though, that as you say, making the money available on the front end, though, could potentially be worse for them politically, that there would be a cost at the ballot box. Is there any economic cost, any economic merit to that?
Well, right now, the U.S. government is able to borrow at very, very low rates. And so now is the time, if there's a need to run deficits, now is the time to go ahead and use that government's fiscal capacity to provide the assistance. And so there's no question over the long run, we have to make changes. We have to make some decisions to get our fiscal house in order, to get some balance. But right now is the time to provide assistance.
Neel Kashkari, thank you for your insights. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you all for watching. Until next week. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.